I didn't lie to everyone else first. I lied to myself. That's the part that matters most. I told myself I was being practical. That comfort was earned. That stability meant I had done something right with my life. I told myself that truth could wait, that it didn't need immediate attention as long as things were functioning. Functioning became my standard. From the outside, my life looked settled. Predictable in a way people admire. I had routines, responsibilities, familiar places, familiar faces. Nothing felt urgent, and that felt like success. I didn't notice how quiet I had become. When truth first tried to surface, it didn't arrive as a dramatic realization. It came as small discomforts I quickly explained away. A tightness in my chest when I agreed to things I didn't want. A strange emptiness after moments that were supposed to feel meaningful. I told myself this was normal. That adulthood was about managing expectations, not chasing feelings. That comfort was more reliable than honesty. So I chose comfort. Every time a decision appeared, I asked the same question: which option keeps my life intact? Not which one felt right. Not which one reflected who I was becoming. Just which one required the least disruption. Comfort rewards that question generously. It gives you peace in the short term. It smooths the edges. It removes friction. It makes everything feel manageable. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, it trains you to stop listening to yourself. I learned how to live without inner conflict by silencing the part of me that caused it. At first, it felt like relief. I stopped questioning things. I stopped imagining alternatives. I stopped paying attention to the subtle resistance that used to appear when something wasn't aligned. I replaced that resistance with logic. With reasons. With explanations that sounded mature and responsible. I became very good at justifying my life. The problem was, justification isn't the same as meaning. Days began to blur together. Not in a chaotic way, but in a clean, organized way. My calendar was full. My obligations were clear. I knew exactly what each day would require of me. What I didn't know anymore was what I required. I remember a moment, small, forgettable on the surface, when someone asked me a question that should have been easy. "Are you happy?" I answered quickly. Too quickly. "Yeah," I said. "I think so." The word sounded correct. Reasonable. Acceptable. They didn't feel true. That was the first time I noticed the gap. The space between what my life looked like and what it felt like to live inside it. I didn't panic. I didn't confront it. I simply made the gap smaller by lowering my expectations. That's what comfort teaches you to do. You don't demand more. You adapt downward. I stopped talking about what I wanted and started talking about what made sense. I stopped trusting desire and started trusting routines. I told myself that excitement was overrated, that calm was the real goal. But calm without truth is sedation. I didn't realize how much of myself I had muted until I tried to listen again. One evening, alone, with nothing demanding my attention, I noticed how empty my thoughts felt. Not peaceful, vacant. I searched for something I wanted badly enough to feel uncomfortable about it. I couldn't find it. That scared me. Because desire doesn't disappear on its own. It retreats when it's ignored long enough. It learns not to speak when it's never answered. I had trained myself well. Comfort had given me a life that didn't argue with me. A life that asked very little emotionally. A life that worked, as long as I didn't ask too many questions. So I stopped asking. I stayed in situations that felt slightly wrong because they were familiar. I chose paths that were easy to explain instead of ones that felt honest. I told myself that truth was flexible, that it could be adjusted to fit the shape of the life I already had. I didn't realize I was adjusting myself instead. The most dangerous thing about comfort is that it doesn't hurt enough to leave. It keeps you just satisfied enough to stay, just stable enough to endure, just distracted enough not to notice how much time is passing. Years went by quietly. And then one night, without warning, a thought arrived fully formed and undeniable: if nothing changes, this will be my life forever. The thought didn't terrify me. It hollowed me. I realized I wasn't afraid of losing what I had. I was afraid of discovering that what I had chosen was all I would ever allow myself. That fear didn't come from nowhere. It came from every moment I had chosen comfort over truth and told myself it was wisdom. That night, I understood something I wish I had understood earlier: comfort doesn't steal your life. It convinces you to give it away slowly. And once I saw that, I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine just because nothing was breaking. Because I was. Quietly. Once I admitted to myself that comfort had a cost, I couldn't unsee it. It showed up in the smallest places, in how quickly I dismissed my own reactions, in how instinctively I chose familiarity over curiosity, in how often I told myself this is good enough without ever asking good enough for what. My life hadn't collapsed. It had calcified. I began to notice how carefully everything was arranged to prevent discomfort. My routines were optimized. My relationships were stable. My choices were predictable. I rarely felt anxious, and I almost never felt excited. That absence of intensity had once felt like peace. Now it felt like absence. I tried to introduce honesty in manageable doses. I told myself I didn't need to tear everything down, just adjust a few things. Speak a little more openly. Take a small risk. Admit dissatisfaction without acting on it immediately. But honesty doesn't like half measures. Every time I acknowledged a truth without responding to it, the tension increased. Awareness sharpened the pain instead of relieving it. I felt like I had turned the volume up on a signal I still refused to follow. At night, my thoughts circled the same questions. What if I've waited too long? What if this is just who I am now? What if the version of me that wanted more is gone? Those questions frightened me because they didn't feel dramatic. They felt reasonable. Plausible. Like conclusions someone could quietly reach after years of choosing comfort. I realized then that comfort hadn't just protected me from risk. It had protected me from discovery. Discovery requires friction. It requires moments where things don't work, where certainty breaks, where you have to respond instead of maintain. I had eliminated those moments so effectively that my life no longer revealed anything new about me. I was maintaining a known quantity. That realization created a strange panic, not loud, not urgent, but focused. I began to see my days as repetitions rather than progressions. I could predict my reactions, my conversations, even my disappointments. Predictability is reassuring until it becomes proof that you're not changing. I started imagining my future with uncomfortable clarity. Not in images of disaster or regret, but in scenes of continuation. The same rhythms. The same compromises. The same internal negotiations repeated year after year. That future didn't scare me because it was bad. It scared me because it was likely. Nothing in my life was pushing me to change. I had built it that way. No external pressure. No crisis. No urgency. I could stay here indefinitely and be praised for my stability. That was when I understood how seductive comfort really is. It doesn't trap you. It convinces you to stay. I felt torn between two fears, the fear of losing what I had, and the fear of losing myself entirely if I kept it. The first fear was loud and familiar. The second was quieter, and far more dangerous. I began to notice how often I delayed conversations that mattered. How frequently I postponed decisions that required honesty. How easily I talked myself out of change by reminding myself of what I would disrupt. Disruption had become my enemy. I told myself that wanting more was a form of ingratitude. That questioning my life meant disrespecting the effort it had taken to build it. That walking away from comfort was irresponsible when so many people would envy it. Those thoughts sounded mature. They were also deeply effective at keeping me stuck. One evening, I found myself sitting alone, doing nothing in particular, when I felt an unexpected surge of anger, not toward anyone else, but toward myself. I realized how much energy I had spent protecting a life that no longer reflected me. I had become loyal to my own avoidance. That anger surprised me. I wasn't used to feeling it. I had trained myself to soften every sharp emotion into something manageable. But this time, I didn't suppress it. I let it speak. It said, "You are allowed to want more than what is comfortable." That sentence landed harder than any criticism ever had. Because it challenged the rule I had been living by: that wanting more was dangerous, childish, or unrealistic. I had treated desire like a liability instead of a compass. I began to see my comfort not as a reward, but as a trade. I had traded intensity for ease, truth for continuity, presence for predictability. And trades always have consequences. The consequence was subtle but severe. I no longer trusted myself to know what I wanted. Years of choosing what was easiest to maintain had eroded my confidence in my own instincts. That scared me more than change ever had. I realized then that staying comfortable wasn't neutral anymore. It was an active decision to remain unchanged. To keep postponing myself. To keep living inside a version of my life that required my silence to survive. I started to feel claustrophobic, not physically, but internally. Like I was occupying a space that fit perfectly as long as I didn't breathe too deeply. The thought of leaving scared me. The thought of staying scared me more. I didn't know yet what I would do. I didn't have a plan or a dramatic vision of transformation. I only knew that comfort had stopped being a place of rest and become a place of hiding. And hiding, I finally understood, was costing me time I could never recover. That realization didn't give me answers. It gave me urgency. For the first time in years, I felt the pressure of time, not as panic, but as clarity. The understanding that life doesn't ask loudly for participation. It simply continues, whether you show up or not. And if I didn't act, imperfectly, clumsily, without guarantees, I would keep choosing comfort until there was nothing left to choose against it. I didn't escape my life. I stopped negotiating with it. That was the shift. For a long time, I had treated truth like something flexible, something that could be adjusted to fit comfort. I believed I could acknowledge what I felt without acting on it, as if awareness alone were enough. It wasn't. Awareness without response had become another form of self-betrayal. So I stopped asking myself whether change was reasonable. I asked whether staying silent was still honest. The answer was no. I didn't make a dramatic exit. I didn't announce a reinvention. I didn't burn bridges to prove a point. What I did was smaller, steadier, and far more uncomfortable. I began choosing in ways that didn't protect comfort as the highest value. The first few choices felt wrong in my body. My chest tightened. My thoughts raced. The instinct to retreat, to smooth things over, to keep everything intact screamed loudly. I recognized that voice now. It wasn't wisdom. It was habit. I spoke truths I had rehearsed for years but never delivered. Not perfectly. Not eloquently. Sometimes clumsily. Sometimes with pauses that betrayed my fear. I let the discomfort linger instead of rescuing everyone from it. Some people were surprised. Some were confused. A few were quietly disappointed. That hurt. But what hurt more was realizing how much of my identity had been built around not causing that reaction. I had trained myself to be easy to accept, even when acceptance required my absence. When I stopped doing that, the world didn't collapse, but it did rearrange itself. Some things loosened. Some expectations fell away. Certain connections revealed limits I hadn't wanted to see. I learned that comfort often depends on your willingness to stay predictable. I was no longer predictable. That didn't make me brave. It made me present. Presence is heavier than comfort. It requires attention. It demands that you notice when something doesn't fit and decide what to do about it. It doesn't let you outsource responsibility to routine or logic or timing. There were days I wanted to go back. Not because the old life fulfilled me, but because it was quiet. Familiar. Forgiving of delay. The temptation to return to ease whispered constantly. I remembered what ease had cost. It had cost me urgency. It had cost me trust in my own instincts. It had cost me the ability to feel fully alive without justification. I let myself grieve that. Grief for the years I had spent choosing comfort when I should have chosen truth. Grief for the momentum I never built. Grief for the confidence that might have grown if I hadn't treated desire like a liability. I didn't rush that grief into a lesson or a slogan. I sat with it. Because grief is what happens when you finally tell the truth about time. Time doesn't punish you for waiting. It simply continues. I stopped measuring my life by how stable it looked and started measuring it by how awake I felt inside it. I stopped asking whether a choice would preserve comfort and started asking whether it would preserve integrity. That didn't make decisions easier. It made them clearer. I made mistakes. I misjudged situations. I chose things that didn't work out. I disappointed people, including myself, along the way. But for the first time, the consequences belonged to choices I had actually made. That mattered. Even failure felt different when it was honest. It didn't hollow me out. It taught me something. It left me intact. I learned that comfort isn't evil. It's just not a compass. It can be a place to rest, but it can't be the place you decide from. When it becomes your primary guide, it slowly replaces your voice with habit. I had let that happen. And I had almost let it finish. If there is a confession at the heart of this story, it's this: I didn't wake up too late because time ran out. I woke up because I finally stopped confusing ease with truth. I don't know where my life goes from here. I don't pretend to have certainty now. What I have is participation. I am here for my own decisions, even when they scare me. Especially when they scare me. If someone listening to this recognizes themselves, if your life works, looks fine, and still feels quietly wrong, don't wait for it to break. Comfort won't warn you. Stability won't object. Time won't pause. You don't need a dramatic reason to choose differently. You don't need permission to want more than what is easy. You don't need to leave everything to stop lying to yourself. I chose comfort over truth for a long time. And I didn't lose everything. I almost lost myself. Now, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the path isn't clear, I choose truth first, not because it guarantees happiness, but because it allows me to be present in my own life. And that, after years of quiet compromise, is the most honest thing I've ever chosen.